Business athletes, what is going on? Fraser here, coming back at you with another action-packed episode. This one is the busy man's blueprint for building muscle and burning body fat. Basically, the ultimate guide of how a busy professional and high performer should train to just maximize everything that you do. So when I say body recomposition, I mean that ability to burn body fat and build muscle and stay strong and injury-free and do it all at the same time. Do it all at the same time, even if you're at home or you're traveling in any type of environment. Because one of the things that I found is that we can talk a lot about blood work and nutrition and supplementation and peptides and all these things. But the elephant in the room is often the intensity and the types of overload and the strategy that you actually train with. I feel like for a lot of people, early on, just locking in the diet, getting that established helps a lot. Because typically people just need to start losing some body fat. But what I find is that once they get through that initial phase of that fat loss at the front end, it's really, really important that we establish a very good workout training base. And so the way I think about this is whether you are a stay-at-home mother or a busy professional or the CEO of a business or an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur, whatever you are, basically one of the main goals that we have in general is how do you accelerate your physical body composition change, but do it in a way where you're not burning out. You know, I've seen so many people do round after round after round of 75 hard, for example, Andy Frisella's thing. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that quote-unquote program. I think if you have good programming within the 75 hard concept, it's not a bad thing. But what I find is that people burn the candle at both ends. The training volume, the intensity, it's so high that it starts to basically break your body down. So this is for you if you need to lose a bunch of body fat and you want to do it fast and in a healthy way. This is for you if you want to build more muscle because you feel like you're either skinny fat or you're just not where you want to be aesthetically. And this is for you if you're someone that feels like the only time you've ever really been able to get any momentum is when everything is going well and you have lots of time and you're at home not traveling. And outside of that, if you're traveling or if you're really busy, especially if you're a parent, you just don't have the bandwidth to keep it up. And so because of that, you just yo-yo back and forth and back and forth. So this is for you for those reasons. And let me preface this all by saying, even with my own results, I traveled in our 44-foot fifth wheel RV for 2+ years with my family, with Lauren and Zia. So we wanted to sort of try and find a place in the US that we wanted to call home. You know, we wanted to travel around and experience living in different places and figure out, you know, if we're going to get some land to build a house, where would we want it to be? And so for that reason, for about 2+ years, we traveled around exploring. And what that meant was that there was many, many times where I didn't have any gym access. You know, if you're in the Shenandoah Mountains of Virginia, for example, you're not going to have a gym close by. So first off, how do you train when you're traveling, when you're in this dynamic environment? What should you be doing? And what type of equipment is some essential items to help you with that? And so I was able to stay in a phenomenal shape all through that period of time. And even probably argue I would continue to progress. And that's just one example of many. You know, my buddy and my student musician, Chris Daltrey, I've been mentoring him for a number of years now. and he's just coming back from a tour in Europe. So he travels around, not just domestically around the US on a tour bus, but he's just come back from an overseas tour as well. And so think about it, if you're on a tour bus, sometimes you're not even going to have direct access to a hotel gym. And then sometimes a hotel gym might be very limited. So what do you do then? So for someone that's traveling to different events and seminars and speaking and doing different stuff, what should you be doing? And this is what we're going to be talking about. So what I would say right out of the gate is that body recomposition is possible, where you're basically building lean muscle and you're burning body fat at the same time. I've seen it happen in body scans and DEXA scans. You will have some people say, oh, you can't do it, or it's very difficult, and I don't think it's any of that as long as you have a good system down. And I'm going to explain that system to you today. Now, the benefit and the byproduct of body recomposition is that you have to basically internally improve your metabolic health, you have to improve your insulin sensitivity, and you have to improve your hormone profiles and your thyroid metabolism as a way to actually make that physical change possible. So you're basically addressing all the internal biology. Now, the first thing that I will say is that if you train really hard and you have a very good training plan, but you are very sloppy with your diet, or you're taking supplements that are just stressing out your system even more, like a lot of fat-burning stimulants and things, and or you're just grinding away really hard and not sleeping well and drinking alcohol and doing things that just a lot of people will do, you can train your butt off and you can train like a savage, but you won't maximize your body composition. Like, you still probably won't look great. And it's definitely a tightrope walk of a multitude of these things. So it's one part diet quality and making sure that you're eating a lot of micronutrients, you're keeping the diet pretty clean, you're not just throwing in a bunch of sort of junk food stuff, but as long as it quote-unquote fits your calories, it's okay, because that is going to have an inflammatory effect on your body. It's going to have a negative exertion on hormone profiles and insulin sensitivity, and insulin sensitivity affects what's called your partitioning ratios. So your partitioning ratios are basically when you eat food, your body has to determine where it pushes those calories. So you eat food, your body breaks it down into blood sugar. That blood sugar sits in your bloodstream. And now with partitioning ratios, your body has to say, okay, we're going to push 80% of this into muscle as stored muscle glycogen. And then we're going to put a little bit in the liver, and then there'll be a little bit in the bloodstream, but we'll put minimal amounts into body fat stores. That's ideal. That's what you would want in an ideal scenario. Now, the average person who's doesn't have a dialed-in lifestyle and is not moving well and not really training properly, they'll partition 80% of that into body fat. And then the other 20% just sits in their bloodstream. So that high blood sugar in your bloodstream is what starts to cause the brain fog and the mood issues, and you want to take a nap. So if you feel like you need to take naps, and or if you feel like you're getting brain fog, part of that's that elevation in blood glucose in your bloodstream. So I say all this because you can train your butt off, but if those things are not accounted for, you won't feel and look very good. It definitely is a combination of all of these things. And also, but by the way, I've seen a number of people on testosterone replacement therapy, hormone replacement therapy, and I think they thought that was going to be a magic bullet. I think they thought, okay, well, if I get on the testosterone replacement therapy, I'll look like a bodybuilder. And I hate to break it to you, but many people that will use that but aren't very diligent with their lifestyle, their sleep, and their diet, they still don't look good at all. I call them the fat Ferrari owner. It's people that have their Ralph Lauren polo shirt on, and they've got their fancy cars and their watch, but they're still puffy and watery looking and bloated and swollen. And part of that's all the stress in the system. Your inflammation's through the roof. You're not sleeping well. Your lymphatic system is all backed up. You can just tell by looking at someone, if they're all swollen and puffy. That's blood pressure, that's estrogen, that's lymphatic system backup. You can train as hard as you want, but that won't help these things. So I just really wanted to put that emphasis at the front end so you know that, yes, this episode will be really useful, but it's also one part of a larger overarching equation. So we want to focus on improving hormone profiles, improving insulin sensitivity, improving thyroid metabolism, improving metabolic health. And as a byproduct, that's going to help build lean muscle. It's going to help lose body fat. It's essentially going to slow down aging more. One of the cool things about muscle mass is think about muscle mass as the engine of your metabolism. What I tell people is one of the best things that you can do, and especially for the ladies, by the way, this is really useful for the ladies to know, but one of the most important things you can do is weight train using larger compound lifts, so like deadlifts, squats, lunges, bent over rows, the bigger compound lifts, and I'll talk about what compound lifts are in this conversation, because as you build muscle, that's what burns more calories while you sleep. See, you can't diet your way to fat loss. And you can't even just diet your way to long-term sustainable fat loss. One of the reasons why people will burn out, so they'll diet for a while, they get some results, and then they burn out, is because they don't yet have enough muscle mass, aka lean metabolic tissue. So that muscle's going to be the stuff that burns your body fat while you're resting, while you're sleeping. So it's like an investment. And I would say that a lot more research has been coming out in recent years demonstrating that muscle mass is an organ and that it plays an intimate role in longevity. So it's very, very important for longevity. Now, someone might say, oh, but I thought, if bodybuilders are jacked and massive, how come, they don't live for a long time? And part of it is because they use a ton of anabolic steroids. That's the trade-off. So yes, that will be the consequence of someone who's abusing drugs. But for someone that's not doing that stuff, you building and holding muscle mass is actually a longevity tool. And the reason for this is because, one, like we talked about, it helps with metabolic activity. It helps with the metabolic engine, your metabolic health. It helps with insulin sensitivity. But it also helps with mobility, getting up, getting down. One of the things that really sees people deteriorate as they get older is it's like if you don't use it, you'll lose it. And so as they lose muscle mass, they lose their ability to get up and down and squat down to the floor and get themselves up off the ground. And as soon as that starts happening, that's not good. So you really want to think about muscle mass not just as a cosmetic thing. Yeah, it obviously makes you look great. So you're an awesome walking billboard for your brand. You're a great role model for your family and your children. But beyond that, it's literally a longevity tool. It's a longevity lever. And so I would say for that reason alone, it's worth doing these things. So when it comes to resistance training / weight training, there's obviously lots of different ways that you can do this. And I've got some notes here, and I'm going to kind of jump around a little bit. But I want to give you enough information in this episode where you feel like when you leave here, you know what type of pillars and processes you should be focusing on to get the best type of workout in for you and your goal. That's the most fast, direct way to the body composition you want, but not getting yourself injured or burning out. Because, for example, people don't realize that if you train really hard and you're just really slaughtering yourself in the gym, like a lot of CrossFit people will do this. They'll just train really hard and overload very aggressively. But what happens is sometimes when you train that hard, you drive up hunger hormones and craving signals. Like your body is so strained and starved for nutrients because you've tore your body up so hard. The signals in your body are like, wow, we need a lot of repair to go on to fix all this damage. And so what you find is that hunger responses increase. And so then what happens is you have someone that's training really hard, but because they're stressing out their nervous system so much, they're sending excessive hunger signals. So now they're having to like basically cardio and work out their way to fat loss because they're eating too much food. So you get into this vicious cycle of eating too much food. And so the only way that you can even sustain your current result is by overtraining. And that's one of the biggest problems that I see. People train too much, they do too much crazy stuff, and then they do too much like very aggressive dieting, and it's not sustainable long term. So I want to walk through what a more sustainable process looks like for you. Now, when it comes to training, the first thing that I'd say is you want to be thinking about your lifestyle and your environment. So I have a pretty elaborate home gym at this point. I call it the Superhuman Gym. And when we get our house built, I plan on getting a barndominium set up next to it that will be like my office, my podcast and my video studio, and a full commercial-sized gym. That's the goal. Because one, I feel like there's a lot of awesome content and stuff that I could capture for the business athlete brand. I also feel like there's some amazing workshops and masterclass seminars that I'll be able to run in that facility and have you even come out for the experience. But more than that, I try my best to compress down and collapse time horizons to my goals and try to eliminate a lot of the fluff in the day. And so, yes, I've trained at gyms on and off for years. But for me personally, I feel like I don't want to have to get ready to go to the gym, do the 10 to 15 minute drive, go in there. You know, like by the time you have to get ready to go to the gym and then you get back, you're losing, 30 to 60 minutes a day of just fluff, of commute and fluff. Now, I realize some people, that's okay. They don't mind it. Maybe the gym is closer. Maybe it helps them reset their mind getting out of their house. You have every reason to want to work out at a gym sometimes. So I understand that some people are different, right? That's okay. But what I would tell you is that if you're going to have a home gym set up, I'm going to quickly run you through some of the key pieces of equipment that I think you should get as a base. Then I'm going to quickly talk about what you do when you're traveling on the road. And then I'm going to talk about what you look for in a gym, just quickly, because I want to preface that so then you know where you're even starting. Before we start talking about special tactics with training, you need to know where you're even starting. So the first thing that I'll say is if you have a home gym set up, some type of simple base structure would be a bit like a set of adjustable dumbbells, ideally adjustable dumbbells that go up to about 90 to 100 pounds. See, a lot of people get the Bowflex dumbbells, but they get the Bowflex ones that go up to 50. And what happens is at a certain point, you get pretty strong. And when you hit the max capacity on those dumbbells, you're going to paint yourself into a corner where your only option is to do more reps. And that's a lot of wear and tear on your joints. It's a lot of wear and tear on your body, and it takes more time. And so now, not only are you making your workouts longer, but you're basically wearing down your joints and your system even more, and you can't overload your training well enough to actually continue like a lot of muscle building. And so you'll typically start hitting plateaus. So I say this because you want to ideally get the Bowflex 1090s and or another 90 plus pound adjustable dumbbell set. Now I say adjustable dumbbells just because if you're getting singular dumbbells, one, they cost a lot if you're just getting a ton of them. Two, it takes up a bunch more room. And three, you need to be able to do what's called progressive overload with your training. This is a really important concept that I'm going to be touching on when I talk about training techniques, progressive overload. A lot of people don't really think about this and they don't really do it. And that's partly why you just kind of wheel spin with your physique and you don't really build any muscle. So we want adjustable dumbbells. I would tell you to get 1 or 2 sets of the powerlifting loop tension bands, not the tension bands with the handles on the end, powerlifting loop tension bands. Ideally get 2 sets. The reason why I get 2 sets is because then you can do bilateral movements with them. So I used the tension bands a lot when we were traveling in our RV. They're really versatile. They're lightweight. They're not super expensive. You can create a ton of tension on the muscle. Like I said, they're versatile. They've got a very good safety profile in terms of injury risk. But I get two of them because in that way, let's say I'm doing like a bent over row and I'm anchoring those bands to the legs of the RV or something. I can then bend over and row one band in one arm and one band in the other arm. It's more optimal than trying to hold on to one band with two hands. You'll understand why when you do it. Just trust me when I say it's better to get two sets. Because think about it, that's why you'd have two cable pulleys. It's the same principle. You're just swapping the cables for the bands. So 2 sets of the powerlifting loop tension bands. I would get a range of bands. I try and get a full set where it's like blue, green, purple, red, orange, yellow. So heavy duty bands like the big fat ones all the way down to the thin ones. So you want to get both. Now, outside of bands and Bowflex dumbbell, you want an adjustable bench because it's going to be movements that you want to basically either prop yourself up on, like a chest-supported bench row or an incline chest press or whatever. So you're going to need something like that. So an adjustable bench. And then I would also tell you to get a doorway pull-up bar. So the doorway pull-up bar is quite a useful tool because it's harder to train back if you don't have a pull-up mechanism. So I would set that up, and then you can even add the tension bands to the doorway pull-up bar to give you to do some assisted pull-ups. So if you're a woman or if you're a guy that's still trying to develop his strength, you can do it band-assisted pull-ups and stuff. And I'm going to talk about why these bigger muscle movements, so the pull-ups or deadlifts and things, I'm going to talk about the ROI of an exercise in this conversation. When it comes to maximizing fat loss, you will understand why it's so important to prioritize certain exercises over other ones. So we want tension bands, pull-up bar, and I would say that's probably all you need as a base. You could get a very good workout in with those pieces of equipment in as a base. Now, what I have in my superhuman gym is a bit more elaborate, but again, it's because I'm much more advanced, and I'll tell you why I get the things I do so you can understand. So I have an air bike. I love the air bike because that allows me to get some zone 2 and high intensity intervals in, which is very good for VO2 max, good for burning visceral fat, and good for heart health. So I'll do that. I have a plate loaded leg extension and leg curl machine. And the reason for that is because it's harder to do isolation exercises when you're at home for legs. Isolation movements are also what I would call primers. So a primer is exercises you start with at the front end of your workout that kind of almost warm up your ligaments, joints, and tendons. So the leg extension, for example, is very much like a primer or a warm-up exercise for, say, a squat or a leg press. So you're getting that knee nice and warm before you then go into the heavier squats or the heavier leg press or the heavier pendulum squat. So, and also, you can just target those muscles much more effectively when you're using isolation movements. So I have a leg extension and leg curl machine. I have an Olympic bar, so the big barbell with a bunch of Olympic plates. So I have about 600 to 700 pounds of plates because I've deadlifted up to 600 plus pounds. So again, it's going to depend on your strength, but I do think having a barbell with some plates is also a great idea because it allows you to do some of those bigger compound movements to a higher level, like a deadlift. Like deadlift variations, I think are a very useful tool for optimizing body composition change long term. Now, another thing that I have is I have a big Force USA G20 cable station. So it's like a big dual stack cable station with a Smith machine and a power rack. So it's pretty elaborate. It's got a pull-up bar in it. It's pretty elaborate. It's an investment. But I knew that this would be all I would need to get a very advanced, high-level workout in and also have my private days out here where I can show students very, very useful strategies with this type of setup. And then they can go back and use it at their gym. So I got the Smith machine because it allows you to take your sets of exercises closer to mechanical failure without needing someone to spot you. So this is going to come back to that progressive overload concept. When I'm doing a Smith machine incline chest press, if I was just doing a normal barbell, I wouldn't be able to push as close to failure because I'd be worried that I'll get stuck. I'll be worried that the bar would just stay on my chest, and that would be not good. So I use a Smith machine. So I can basically push as hard as possible. And then right before I can't get any more, I can rack it wherever I want in the lift. So I can even rack it if it's like 1 inch above my chest and just kind of slither my way out from under it. So I got a Smith machine with the sole intention of being able to take my working sets of certain exercises right to the edge of mechanical failure. And that is one of the biggest drivers for maximizing muscle building. And most people don't know this. That's why I have the result that I have. And this way, you can do less total working sets. So instead of doing 4 or 5 sets of something, you can do 2 sets and get the same biological response as someone doing 5 sets. So now you just cut your workout down by 50%. That's exactly how a business athlete should operate, because then you reclaim all this extra time. So the first thing to understand is that would be, and so, the other thing that I have is I have a pendulum squat. So the reason why I have a pendulum squat is because, again, I wanted to have a movement that would really target the quads and the legs, but I could push it very close to failure, and just like, if I get stuck, I can just get out from underneath it. Now, I would tell you that you don't need all these things that I have, but I definitely say that those front end pieces of equipment that I mentioned are a good place to begin. Now, if you're traveling, basically just take 2 sets of powerlifting loop tension bands, get a set of the metal hook handles for the powerlifting loop tension bands, so that way you have like a nice sturdy handle to hold on to while you're doing the pulls and while you're using these bands. And the only other thing that, could be useful is something like a Max Pro cable station. So one of the things that my student musician Chris Daltrey uses quite a bit when he's on his tour bus, outside of the powerlifting loop tension bands, is a Max Pro cable station. Basically, it's a little cable setup that you can stand on that creates a sort of mechanical tension on the line. And so you can do quite challenging deadlifts. You can do a lot of movements with it. It's not the best thing I've ever used. It's definitely got its downsides. But I would say if you're someone that is traveling a lot and you want to be able to get the big ROI movements in like deadlifts, which again, I'm going to talk about why that's so important soon, so make sure you take a mental note of it. Things like deadlifts, just for that alone, are almost worth it. But basically, 2 sets of powerlifting loop tension bands, metal handles to hold onto them, and then a Max Pro, if you want, as a bonus. So those would be the main staples. Now, obviously, if you're looking for a gym, I'm looking for ideally something that's a 24-hour gym, and I'm looking for something that's within a 10-minute radius of my house. That's the main 2 things. And then at that point, I'm going to go in there and kind of assess when it's busy and when it's not. And if it's a gym that's just not busy much at all, that's fine. I'll go at any point when I want. But if it's a gym that you sort of get some peak hours, I will absolutely shuffle my routine around to try to make sure that I get in there when it's a bit more quiet, so I'm not impeded by having to work around other people much. One of the reasons why I ended up getting my home gym in the first place was because I found that when I go to the gym, because I'm so advanced and because of the way that I look, I often get people ask me a lot of questions. And I have nothing wrong with it. I mean, I love, curious people wanting to learn. But what I was finding was that my workouts would get really impeded. And they would take a lot longer, and I would lose my pump, and I wouldn't be able to get through the sets as fast as I want. And I thought to myself, you know what? Not only do I just want to have this time for me, quiet, where I can kind of get in the zone, but 2, I don't even want to necessarily have to go through the whole commute and the whole process. I want to reclaim that time and put it towards like family time or coaching or consulting or whatever it was. So that was just my choice. But I'd be looking for a gym that kind of is at least close by, 10 minutes or less, and 24-hour ideally. And also, ideally, if they have a set of Olympic barbells, so like to do a deadlift. Some gyms won't have big free bars, like a big barbell, because of insurance and safety reasons. But ideally, you want one that does, because longer term, I would tell you it is worthwhile adding that into your rotation. Now, once you've sort of established, and there's nothing wrong with doing some workouts at a gym and having a backup system at home. I would encourage a lot of you guys who are the business athletes, I think it's wise to get a good setup at home as a backup system. So if anything happens, if you get busy or something happens with the kids, you're not in a position where you're like, well, I got nothing done because I couldn't make it to the gym. Like, don't let yourself get into that position. So you want a backup mechanism. So I'd be doing the base home workout setup that I mentioned, and I'd be having that gym option as a primary focus. Now, when it comes to trying to figure out like how should you structure your workouts, right? What I do is think of your workout like pieces of a puzzle, and it follows a sequence. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to walk through the subsections of a workout. So the way I train, and I feel like this is an optimal way for most people to consider training, if you're wanting to maximize body composition change as much as possible in the shortest amount of time, just to get the best bang for buck. This is to get the best bang for buck. You know, if you want to be a powerlifter or if you want to be a pro bodybuilder, it's going to be a bit different. But most of you guys are just going to want to maximize your body composition as a busy professional and business athlete. So the first section is what I call primers. So your primers are essentially what they sound like. They're priming the body for the bigger lifts. So primers are usually going to be isolation movements. General rule of thumb is, think of it like this. Isolation movements are exercises where basically one joint is moving. So an isolation movement is a bicep curl. An isolation movement is a tricep pushdown. An isolation movement is a leg curl. An isolation movement is a leg extension, because you're just moving your knee joint or you're just moving your elbow joint. Now, if you move two joints at once, so if you flex your elbow and your shoulder, that's called a compound lift. So isolation, one joint, compound lift, two. Now, primers are typically movements with one joint. I do these first to get the body ready, to get the warm-up in, to get the lubricated joints ready for battle. Because if you come straight in and you go from being cold to straight doing like a chest press or straight doing a deadlift, you have to warm up a lot more diligently, and your risk of injury is way higher. I've been training for 20 years, and I've never really had any serious injuries, and I push myself hard when I train because of these principles. So if you're all jacked up and injured, you really, really need to pay attention to this, because part of your rate limiting factor long-term is going to be how jacked up you're getting yourself. If you're getting shoulder impingements and elbow, if you're all injured, you're probably training like a clown, and you really need like that. You need these concepts first and foremost. And then what I would tell you is, heck, get into my Business Athlete Council, because even in there, I will post videos of training and give you guys feedback on how to do it. And if someone needs help, they can post a video of themselves doing a lift, and I will literally watch it and give you adjustments and feedback. And I especially do that with my one-on-one students. So I would tell you, if you're injured, take advantage of being in my mastermind groups for that reason. Because the injuries will definitely be the thing that holds you back. It will absolutely slow you down. It will be demoralizing. And I see people yo-yo diet so much because they get injured all the time. And it doesn't have to be that way. So primers are a really, really good way to avoid getting jacked up. I also find that a lot of the isolation exercises are what I would call like aesthetic movements. So your aesthetic movements are the muscle groups that make you look good. You know, so for the ladies, it's going to be like your hamstrings, you know, your legs, your quads and your hamstrings. So leg extensions and leg curls. For the guys, well, the ladies too, it's going to be your biceps and triceps. So I find that typically those isolation movements are the ones that make your physique look good as well. So it's like a 2-for-1 deal. You're prioritizing the muscles that make you look good, and you're warming up your system so you avoid injury risk. And what you're basically doing is you're essentially turning on your nervous system. If you were to go into a workout and just start lifting a heavy weight or straight to a compound exercise, your nervous system hasn't really turned on yet. Think of it like a computer that's got to boot up. Your nervous system has got to boot up. It's got to upregulate. And so what I find is that it takes a few primers and it takes a few working sets to get to the point where you've booted up that system where you're actually recruiting enough muscle contraction to push your sets hard enough to even create progressive overload, to get a better physical result. So what I typically do is I start with primers. So you can either do, depending on how many days a week you train, if you train 3 days a week, I would be doing full body workouts. If you train 4 days a week, I'd be doing upper body 2 times and lower body 2 times. If you train 5 times a week, I'd be doing like a push, which is chest, shoulders, triceps, and then a pull, which is back and biceps, and then legs. And I do push-pull legs, upper body, lower body. If you could train 6 days, you do push-pull legs 2 times. The take-home point here is ideally, you want to be training each muscle group 2 times a week. The data and the science seems to support maximal muscle building response happens when the muscles are trained and stimulated 2 times per week. Now, if someone's on anabolic steroids and stuff, they have their body stays in muscle protein synthesis for longer. So they can get away with doing a bro split at the gym. Like a bro split at the gym is like an arm day and then just chest. Like you basically train each muscle group once because you have higher levels of muscle protein synthesis because you're on a bunch of anabolics. If you're just on a normal TRT dose or if you're natural, 2 times a week is going to be more optimal. Now, I would say that, and typically what I find for a lot of people, 40 plus, it almost gets better to either train every second day, or probably 3 to 4 times a week. I would say some people can get away with 5 or 6, but I find for a lot of people training every second day seems to work quite well because you have one recovery day between where you're doing some active recovery. So you've got to, you go for a walk, you get your step count in, or you throw a ruck vest on and you go for a ruck. Something like that on the days between can be quite useful. You've got to remember this. More is not always more. This is where that 75 hard principle comes into this. That if you're training every day, 2 times a day, you will drive up hunger hormones so high, you'll be getting a ton of cravings, and your injury profile will increase a lot. And you'll probably get sick more often too, because your immune system will be so tapped out. So I've found for my guys and gals, 40 plus, typically training every second day is ideal. For people that are maybe like 60 plus, training 3 times a week is ideal. Even sometimes 2 times. And then on the days between, doing some zone 2 cardio and some walking outside, things like that. It depends on the person. It depends on their blood work. See, this is where I will look at your blood work, for example, and I'll look at your hormone profiles, and I'll look at your inflammation in your body, and I will determine training frequency based off those things. Like if your hormones are in the tank, and your thyroid's really slow, and you've got a lot of inflammation in your body, you definitely need to be a bit more mindful about that. So I'd be saying to you, that 3 or 4 times a week is going to probably be better for you than 5 or 6. Now, if those systems in your body are decent in the blood work, then you could probably get away with 5 or 6 times a week. I train every day, but I don't weight train every day. So I'm weaving in rucking, I'm weaving in some air bike, I'm weaving in some zone 2. So I'm getting a sweat on every day. That's what I would tell you is your main principle. You want to sweat every day. Now, that does not mean you need to break your body down lifting weights every day. But don't ever have a day where you don't do anything, because that will affect your energy levels, your productivity, and your cognition. I find one of the main reasons why I use training as what I call a pressure release valve is because it helps with enhancing mood, it stabilizes anxiety, and it gives you more mental clarity. It's literal stuff, by the way. This is not me just like saying it as an anecdote. It helps with insulin sensitivity. It helps with neurochemical response. And so I tell people, especially the high performers, you've got to use training as a pressure release valve, as a way to manage and moderate your state, so you're a better leader, so you're a better spouse and parent, by using the training to discharge some of that internal angst. So training is almost like a performance enhancing business tool. You need to see it as a performance enhancing business tool. Now, what I would say is if you're in that camp where you're like, but when I train, I feel really tired and exhausted, you're either overtraining, like 75 hard stuff, or your hormone systems and your blood work's not great and you're not actually recovering from that volume and stress. So one of those things needs to be addressed, because when you address those things, then you can tolerate it and you will notice improvements with energy and mood and output. So it's really, really important to understand this affects how you perform in your job, how you perform, how you show up. Now, primer exercises first. So I usually do 2 or 3 primers first. On a push day, for example, I'll do a tricep push down. I'll do a cable side raise, which is just using my shoulder joint. And I'll do a cable chest fly, where I'm just doing the shoulder joint from the front. And I'm kind of warming up the chest as well. On a pull day, I would do a bicep exercise. I will do something like a face pull. So a face pull is, even though it's a compound movement, it's a smaller muscle group. It kind of gets the rotator cuff and the shoulders ready and warmed up. So I'm doing movements that sometimes are 2 joints, like a face pull, but they kind of they tend themselves towards being like a good warm-up exercise, where you're getting your rotator cuff and you're getting the bigger muscle groups ready for the proper lifting. And then obviously on a leg day, I'll do things like leg extensions, leg curls, calf raises, stuff like that. Now, with the primers, typically what you're going to have is you're going to have a sequence of how you execute these. So I'm going to walk through the sequence after I tell you the other 2 sections of the workout. So the second section of the workout is your compound lifts. Your compound lifts are your big money movements. I call them the big money movements. They're the big ROI plays. They're like the deadlifts, the squats, the lunges, the pull-ups, the rows, the chest pressing, the dips. Those are the big ROI movements. Remember this rule of thumb. The more muscle groups you train at once, and the bigger the muscle groups, the bigger the ROI. So if the muscle groups are bigger and you're training more of them together, it is a bigger metabolic and anabolic ROI. So anabolic ROI means better muscle building response. Metabolic ROI means better fat loss response. This is the principles of body recomp. So I will do things like I just mentioned. Those lifts I just mentioned are your sort of big money movements. So that's going to be kind of like the meat. That's going to be the meat of the workout. It's the substance. It's the main chunk. Now, depending on time constraints and different things, there's things you can do with these. You can superset. I would say, generally speaking, 2 working sets per exercise. Like I said, I'm going to go through the exercise sequence after I go through the sections of this. But that middle section of the workout is where the most ROI happens. And that's why the primers are at the front end to get you warm. So it doubles as a warm-up. So you don't actually have to dedicate time to warm up, because it's part of the warm-up. But that's how we create time efficiency. Now, the last part of that workout is what I call the finishers. So the finishers are sort of more isolation movements, or just kind of pump movements. It's almost there to create a metabolic response. So you might do a slightly higher rep range. You might do more supersets or ladder. So you're doing like exercise A, B, C, D back to back. You're essentially using it almost to double as some fat loss as well. Muscle building responds to different stimulus. So yeah, you want to push some heavier weights with sort of lower reps, anywhere between 5 and 12 for the compound lifts. But at the end of the workout, doing more like a metabolic sequence of say like 8 to 15, back to back to back with really short rest periods. It's a good way to just really like put the frosting on the cake at the very end of a workout. So generally speaking, your finisher movements will be metabolic type stuff. You could add in a different type of bicep curl. Maybe on a pull day, the first one you do a concentration curl, and then you do hammer curls as one of your finishers. So I will sometimes just do a similar muscle group, but I will change the movement pattern a little bit. Maybe on a push day, you do a single arm cable side raise as part of your primers. And then as a finisher, you do a double armed dumbbell side raise. or a front raise. So you're still kind of training a similar muscle groups, but you're just hitting them with a different stimulus. Now, we can get away with doing this because we're only doing 2 working sets on these exercises. So once you've got your primers locked in, you've got your compound lifts, you've got your finishes locked in. That's your structure. By the way, I have in my Anomaly Project 6-week course, I have all of this completely mapped out for you in simplicity. So if you hear this and you're like, man, this is a lot of stuff to remember, my 6-week course covers all this. My Business Athlete Council has weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks of structured training in my app that covers all this stuff. So you don't have to kind of figure all this stuff out unless you want to be crazy. Now, when it comes to the sequence of the exercises, what I would tell you is you want to start with what I call a calibration set. So a calibration set is, think of it as it's calibrating your body. It's giving you feedback. It's telling you what hurts, what doesn't, how strong do you feel today, what is going on with your body. And so that calibration set is typically going to be about 20 to 25 reps. It's going to be a lighter weight. You're not trying to break the muscle down, and you're not trying to take the set to failure or anything. It's a lighter weight where you're just pumping the muscle. You move through the reps quite quickly. You're essentially priming the nervous system. You're practicing the technique. You're turning that nervous system on, and you're pumping blood into the target muscles. So 20 to 25 fast reps, quick. So when you're doing your primers, I would do that set nice and fast. Fast reps. You can do it up and down pretty quick. That's getting everything warmed up. Then the next step you want is what I call a jump up set. So your jump up set is basically an intermediary set. Think about your calibration set like your first warm up set, and think about your working sets as your proper serious sets. You're not just going to go straight from your calibration set up to a proper working set without potentially getting injured, especially if you're stronger. Like for me, for example, if I'm going to deadlift 400 or 500 pounds, there's no way I'm going to do a calibration set with 135 pounds and then jump straight up to 400. You get injured. So the jump up sets are almost like an intermediary stepping stone to get you from a warm up to your proper working set weight. So let's say, for example, you are someone who can bench press 70-pound dumbbells. Your calibration set might be 20-pound dumbbells. Then you might do 1 or 2 fast jump-up sets at 40 and 60. And then you go to your working set. Now, with your jump-up sets, you want to do them with a proper tempo, but you only want to do about 5 reps. You only want to do about 5 reps. All you're doing is you're just exposing yourself to the weight. You're exposing your nervous system to the weight, so it's getting turned on. But you're not trying to excessively fatigue the muscle. You want to keep as much energy for your working sets as humanly possible. You want to save it for the good stuff. So once you've done your jump-up sets, that get you up to that working weight. Like I said, it could be anywhere between 1 and 3 quick 5 to 6 rep sets. Once you've done that, your working sets are usually the sets that you'll see indicated on the workout. So if it says like 3 by 12 or 3 by 10 or 3 by 15, that 3 means 3 working sets. The working sets are the key. They are the serious ones where you have to push as hard as you can. Now, I would generally say for most people, 2 working sets per exercise is more than enough. At the level I've built that around 2 working sets. Most people doing 4 or 5 or more working sets, it is just way too much volume. It's what I call fluff work. You're doing junk volume fluff work, where it's like just extra reps for the sake of it. And all that's happening is it's going to drive up your hunger hormones. It's going to make you want to eat more food. It's going to burn out your nervous system more, so you won't actually feel energized from your workout. You'll feel exhausted. And you're more likely to get colds and flus and sick because your immune system is getting hammered because there's so much stress on the nervous system. So can you see here how when I'm thinking about training volume, I'm thinking about all these other variables. I'm not just thinking about muscle building. I'm thinking about all the variables. That's how we want to operate as a business athlete. So with your working sets, you're going to do probably about 2, maybe 3, depending on who you are. And you want to try to take those sets close to failure. Now, I would say general ballpark rep range, and it's going to be, it will vary for each person, which again, why if getting into the tribe, getting into my rotation is probably a good idea because I can give you that specific feedback. But I would say generally speaking, between 5 and 15 repetitions is usually the range. Now, if you want to hone that in a little bit more, I would say between 8 and 12. That's usually going to be the working rep set range that's optimal. Now, what you want to try to be doing is the reason why I give you a rep range rather than just a specific rep target is because the range allows you to factor in what I call biofeedback. So biofeedback is everything from like aches and pains, how tired you are. Your energy, your strength will fluctuate. Your strength will fluctuate on a day-to-day basis based on sleep, stress, calories, inflammation, everything. And what you'll find is that if you don't pay attention to that, that's why I do the calibration sets. You're listening to your body. You're trying to distinguish what is your body telling you. Because in that way, your goal is to be able to push about 1 rep shy of failure. So basically, you want to push hard enough where you probably could have only got 1 more rep out. Now, if you're like me and you have a Smith machine, that's why I gave a Smith machine, because then I can push basically to mechanical failure safely. Now, that's why I also think at the gym, using a lot of machines is a good idea. Because when you use a lot of machines at the gym, you can take those sets right to the edge of mechanical failure. Whether you're male or female, that's probably a good thing to do in terms of maximizing muscle building. Now, obviously, if you have injuries or you're, say, like 50 plus, I would say take your sets 1 rep shy of failure. Just leave a little bit in the tank. And then, because in the science, it seems to indicate that 1 or 2 reps shy of failure is fine in terms of creating progressive overload to build muscle. But they've got to be hard sets, and you've got to be pushing right to that edge of failure. If you don't, this is what most people do, and you will basically just wheel spin. You'll just look the same forever. And that's what I would say most people do. So you need to diligently track this stuff and be like, okay, last week I got 135 pounds for 8 reps. This week I'm going to try to do 140 pounds for 9 reps. And you just keep nudging that rep count up through that rep range, and you keep nudging that weight up as well. 2.5, 5-pound increments, as much as you can. Now, once you've done your working sets, the metabolic, the finisher exercises, like I said, can typically be 8 to 15 repetitions. You still want to try to take your sets close to failure, though. Like, regardless of the rep count. See, the thing to remember is that it doesn't matter what the rep count is. Your goal is to try to get to failure or 1 rep shy of failure as much as you can. And like I said, that's why I have encouraged my Business Athlete Council members to post videos of themselves working out into the group, because I can look at you and look at how you're moving and the speed of the repetitions and tell you how much more you could have got. And then that way you can use that as a target next week. That is such a powerful tool. That alone would help you exponentially change how much muscle mass you build. And then obviously in turn, the more muscle mass you build, the leaner you will get. I can sustain 6 to 7% body fat pretty easily now because I have enough muscle mass. That's the secret weapon. So you must remember that. Now, once you've got your workout structure down and you've got your rep ranges down, once you've done your working sets, the next part of the equation is different types of advanced techniques. Now, I would say generally speaking, for most people, you don't need to get too fancy with stuff. Most people just need to push really hard with their working sets. They need to take the sets close to failure, or if not to failure, if they feel like they can. And they just need to be consistent and consistently create progressive overload with your training. So nudge the weight up each week and push the rep count up through that rep range each week. So when I said the rep range of 8 to 12, try to go from 8 to 9 to 10 to 11 with the same weight, or even push the weight up and the rep count. And once you get to 12, you increase the weight again. So you creep up through that rep range. As you get to the top of the rep range, you keep increasing the weight. And then it's going to make you go back down to the end of the rep range, and you keep working your way up. This concept is absolutely fundamental for you to understand. Now, the advanced techniques. I think a lot of people kind of overdo these. To be honest with you, I used to be guilty of this. I used to think that, you throw in a ton of advanced techniques and it's like a secret weapon. But it seems like now a lot of research seems to indicate that it's really just down to mechanical overload and intensity, regardless of what you do. But some of the advanced techniques kind of let you create more of an intensity. It just gets you a little bit further. One of the common techniques is supersets. Now, I would tell you, if you're under a massive time crunch or you want to move quickly, supersets are great. So it's like 2 or 3, it's like 2 sets back to back. You can do like a ladder, which is like 3 sets plus back to back, but it's typically a superset. It's 2 exercises back to back. I do quite a lot of superset stuff when I'm at a gym and I'm really busy. If I'm in a time crunch and I've got an important thing I have to do and I don't have a lot of time to train, I absolutely leverage supersets and ladders. Now, what I would also say is that you can do drop sets. So a drop set is where you start, and I actually kind of call these exposure sets. So let's say, this is kind of a technique that I sort of came up with. Well, I mean, I'm sure it's been out there before, but I just thought of this myself. An exposure set is basically like a heavier set of like 3 to 5 reps where you're just inoculating yourself to that heavy load. And then to get a few more repetitions out safely, you then drop the weight down by about 20% and you push out another 6 to 10. So an exposure set and a drop set are kind of the same things. So what I would say is, a way to put that together in principle is, let's say you do a bicep curl and you do like 3 to 5 heavier reps first, then drop the weight down and do another 6 to 10. That exposure set just kind of exposes your nervous system, and it exposes your ligaments, joints, and tendons to that heavier load. So in theory, over time, you inoculate yourself to that heavier load so you can get there faster. Eventually, that weight might become your normal working set. That's the key. So you're trying to expedite the process of getting closer to that weight just being your normal working set weight. Now, another technique that I find can be quite useful, especially for elderly populations or people that are injured, is time under tension. So basically, all you're doing is you're just slowing your repetitions down. A normal rep count might be like 2 seconds down, 1 second up on like a chest press, for example. So you might do like 5 or 6 seconds down, 1 second up. Or 5 or 6 seconds down, 2 or 3 seconds up. I typically do slower eccentrics. So the eccentric is the extension part of the movement where the muscle's lengthening, and the contraction is where it's shortening. Now, I will typically do 1 or 2 seconds. I'll do like an explosive contraction and then a controlled eccentric. That's another thing that's worth mentioning, is that the rep tempo itself. I find, generally speaking, controlling the weight down for like 3 to 5 seconds and then doing an explosive lot of force to get the weight up. So control it down, drive and force it up. So it's going to be slower through the eccentric, through the stretching, and then harder through the contraction. I do feel like that concept is quite important in maximizing the actual repetition itself. So you do want to make sure that you always want to make sure that you're creating tension through the eccentric portion of the rep. So this is where people will deadlift, for example, and they'll deadlift the weight up to their waist and they drop it from their waist. That's a total waste of effort because you're losing the eccentric. So what I would tell you is control it down. And the same thing is true for like a chest press or anything. You don't just want the bar or the weight to just come down with gravity. You want to resist it on the way down, creating tension. Tension on the muscle is how you create progressive overload. You've got to think in terms of tension. That's the key. So basically, I'm thinking about things, like I said, drop set, or a ladder. So a ladder would just be like a bunch of exercises back to back to back. I typically, when I'm traveling, will do like full body banded workouts, and I'll just do a big ladder where I'm doing multiple things back to back. But I'll usually do exposure sets or supersets. Those are the main ones. You can do what's called a rest pause or a cluster set. So a rest pause is basically where you do 5 to 10 reps, and you wanted to get to 10, but you only got to 7. You then rest for about 10 seconds, and then you push out another 2 to 3. So you're sort of using it to get to the top end of the rep range. I actually like rest pauses quite a bit. I do think there's a use case for them. So it helps you build up more reps in the tank. And it's very good from a time efficiency standpoint, because really you're just adding an extra 30 seconds on the exercise. You got 10 seconds rest and then probably about 10 or 20 seconds of work, and that's it. So it's very time efficient. Now, the thing that I mentioned earlier was that big muscle group equals big metabolic ROI. So think about like your legs and your back are big muscle groups. Your quads are your biggest muscle group. So that's why I really prioritize pendulum squats, back squats, leg extensions, and your lats are part of your back. And that's why I prioritize pull-ups and pull-downs, that type of thing. So you want to do the big muscle groups more. People see my abs and they're like, oh, I do 500 sit-ups a day. How many do you do? And I'm like, I only do 2 sets of abs 2 times a week. Because again, I'm using all these principles of overload and intensity and resistance, but you will get most of your leanness come from the big muscle groups. So for the guys out there who train legs like once a month, you have a vested interest in training legs 2 times a week if you can recover from it. Because that's going to create a bigger fat burning and anabolic response. Really, really useful tool to know this. So big muscle groups, big metabolic response. So that's why we do the big compound lifts in the middle of the workout, and it's why ideally we hit the same muscle groups 2 times a week, because it's higher energy expenditure, it's a larger hormonal response, and it's a greater metabolic demand. And that's how you create body composition change, maximal body composition change. Now, in terms of training frequency, like I mentioned at the start, the frequency is important to note. Because what you will find is that if you're getting sick often, or you're feeling really burned out, like you feel like your workouts don't energize you, or you notice that your sleep's starting to turn to crap, or your resting heart rate seems to be quite high, that can often be a sign that your body's just under too much stress load. And so you want to take active rest days more strategically. Now, for me, I can lift weights 6 times a week, but I've trained long enough to really be able to listen to my body and adapt it in real time based on how I'm feeling. For the average person, it will take you time to get there. So for the average person, say 20 years old to 35, you could probably train 5 or 6 times a week. As someone who is 35 through to like 50, I would say 4 times a week. And for someone who's 60 plus, I would probably say like 3 times, 2 to 3 times. Now, again, it depends on your intensity. There will be exceptions to this rule. But I would typically say for most people, a nice general consensus is going to be training every second day with weights. The days between you do some type of cardio or active rest or mobility work or yoga flow or something. So you're still moving your body, you're still getting a sweat on. I'd be telling you to focus on trying to stimulate the big muscle groups 2 times a week. So that, depending on how many workouts you do each week, that will dictate the structure of your training. Like I said, it might be upper body, lower body, upper body, lower body. Or it might be like push-pull legs. So it depends on how many times you're training each week. What I would tell you is that if you're a woman that's going through menopause, or if you're someone that's dealing with hormonal issues, or someone that's going through a very stressful period of your life, too much weight training will break your body down more. It will make things worse. And I often see this with women that are going through hormonal changes. I see this with guys that are aging. They just go balls to the wall. And they tax their nervous system so much. Their blood pressure goes up. They get tons of hunger. They're always hungry. They're not even that lean. It's not a good combination of things. So the good thing to know is that sometimes less is more. That's why we want to be so intentional. Can you see here how you need to be very intentional with the way you train, and you need to execute with like a high quality of reps and sets, and not just think about tons of junk volume. So again, it will take practice. So very often you will cross the line before you figure out where you need to be. Like, you've often got to push yourself hard enough to know where your line is in the first place. I would say like a lot of people either don't train hard enough at all, or they overdo it. It's very rare that you find someone who's close to the target. And a lot of people that have that type A go-getter personality, they tend to be the ones that overdo it and then burn out. Overdo it and burn out, and they do 75 hard 8 times. Or alternatively, you have people that are like beginners, and they're quite timid, and they typically really underdo it. And they have no idea how strong they could be, and they just leave so much in the tank. Their body doesn't need to change. And so if you sort of know you're timid, it's probably worth getting some personal training sessions with a good coach to guide you and figure out what type of weight you should be lifting. Again, like, I can do some of this in my business athlete council because I've got such an eye for it at this point. I can look at your rep speed and your intensity, and I can tell. I've been in the game that long. Now, some of the things that I'll kind of like finish off with in terms of recovery and age considerations and injury risk and stuff like that is that you will find that if you're going through really stressful periods of your life, it's better to take sort of rest days in between. You will want to think about using more cables or machines the older you get, because they create more of a safety profile. When you're using barbells and dumbbells, unless you're really advanced, your risk injury is increased. You want to make sure that you're doing your primers at the front end to avoid getting injured by just going straight into your compound lifts. You've got to do the calibrations, you've got to do the jump ups and listen to your body, and not just try and hit that weight you did last week because you want to try and get a personal record. You've got to listen to your body, because sometimes you might have a little bit of a strain, or maybe you didn't sleep quite as well, and your body's really not ready for that today. You have to live to fight another battle. I would tell you that if you have injuries, you've got to get really proactive with rehabbing them and using things like healing peptides and really focusing on the quality of your diet. People don't realize if you're getting all injured and jacked up, part of it is like you probably need to clean your diet up. You've got too much inflammatory stuff in there. There's too many food sensitivities. You are probably not focusing on sleep enough. There's probably some peptides you could be incorporating, things like BPC 157, TB 500, or GHKCU. Anti-aging growth hormone releasing peptides like tesamorelin and ipamorelin. These will all help you long-term, potentially, with recovery and anti-aging principles. They're not necessary, but they're useful. And then obviously you're really focusing on sleep. Sleep's going to be the most powerful anti-aging tool there is. And so you've got to make sure that you prioritize that as much as you can. But when I was saying cables and machines as the ideal things, I do a lot of my workouts with cables and machines and Smith machine, because it allows me to get closer to failure safely. I'm not having to like hit failure with a bar across my back and then get stuck. That's not a good idea. Remember, with injury, you want to control the tempo. So typically the injuries happen when you are just letting it fall down with gravity. You're not controlling the eccentric. And what I would say is, when I talked about those explosive concentrics, as a beginner, I wouldn't even do that. As a beginner, I would just make it nice and controlled, up and down. As you get more advanced and your tendons and ligaments strengthen, their capacity increases, then you can create more force production with the concentric. But as a beginner, you don't really need that. I also think doing single arm and single leg exercises is often a great idea. Unilateral movements, because you can focus on one side at a time. You don't create imbalances, and you can legitimately create more force production, because all your nervous system is focusing on one side at a time. So if you have the time, like single arm side raises or single arm bicep curls, single arm tricep pushdowns is better, in my opinion, than doing both arms at the same time. Now, if you're under a time crunch or you're in a time constraint, doing both arms at the same time is how you get the workout done more proficiently. Now, in terms of rest periods, I would just say it just depends on your time constraints. If you're doing your big compound lifts, your big money movements, anywhere between like 3 and 5 minutes. If you're doing your primers, it can be anywhere between 1 to 3 minutes. And then your finishes might be 60 to 90 seconds. Or not even that, probably 30 to 90 seconds. But it depends on your overall time constraints. I would just say just be conscious of not taking too long and making sure that ideally you're getting through your entire workout if you can. Like I said at the beginning, you've got to make sure that you're logging and tracking the weights you're moving, because if you're not creating progressive overload where each week you're adding weight or reps, you'll be wheel spinning. And to just tie all this back together, it's so important that you understand that the training is like the catalyst for the muscle building. You can have a great diet and you can be doing everything else well, but if you don't have a good intensity with your training, you won't actually create the spark required to even turn the muscle signal on. So you'll have healthy blood work, but you won't look very good. You'll look just kind of thin. Now, the training is what catalyzes that muscle building response. But if you train really hard, but you're eating inflammatory crap and you're not sleeping well and you're stressing yourself out and your blood work's all inflamed, you won't maximize your result. I see a lot of high performers do this. The fat Ferrari owner, they're swollen, they're puffy, their digestion's off, their blood pressure's up, like increased blood pressure, not sleeping well, high heart rate, so much stress on your nervous system. Like you almost look like just a normal skinny fat, like dad bod, even though you're weight training. Because there's so much inflammation in your system and your hormone systems and your thyroid, everything is so suboptimal. So you've got to realize that this is like a multifactorial process. But that's fundamentally why I do what I do. It's why I focus on the blood work. It's why I focus on the food sensitivities and recovery and nervous system. And one of the most powerful tools you can do for fat loss is walking in the sun, because it's very therapeutic on your nervous system. It helps calm your nervous system. So instead of stressing yourself out more, it actually helps with training recovery. That's the key. That's the point. So all this to say, you can train with your bands on the road. You can train at home. You can train at a gym. You can be in any environment. You can superset and do ladders if you need to get through a workout faster. You can structure your training like I mentioned. And you can focus on these rep counts and these rep ranges using the tempos that I suggested. And I promise you, if you're diligent with crossing your T's and dotting your I's, all of this will absolutely accelerate your result. The people that I see get that really good result, not just an okay result, not just a good fat loss result, but a really good transformation, they're the ones that really understand these principles. And like I mentioned, it's a longevity tool. And you've got to think of your training like a performance-enhancing tactic that you must be implementing every day to help yourself be more effective at what you do. Because if you don't do that, that pressure is going to internalize, and that's what causes anxiety. And then that anxiety takes you out of flow state, and when you're not in flow state, you're not going to perform like you could. You'll be irritable. You're not going to be that loving husband or wife or parent like you should be. You're not going to lead your team like you could, because you won't have as much control over your psychology. Fundamentally important. And the byproduct, the benefit, is you end up looking amazing. You become a walking billboard. Nothing screams high-level character, and I hold myself to higher standards than everyone else by being in good shape. Because you can't outsource it. You really can't even bootleg. You can't hack your way to it. You either do it or you don't. And it says a lot about someone's character and their work ethic and their persistence to play a long game. And it's such a powerful walking billboard tool for just being a better leader in general. So there you have it, guys. The business athlete ethos to training, maximum body composition change. Implement these things and be that example.